free Nephi today because I should probably back up a little bit. So I was recently approached by a couple of Mormon missionaries, great kids, like them both, good guys, and so they wanted to sit down to me and talk to me about Mormon. And kind of on our first meeting, the sense I got was that there's this kind of faith, um, despite the evidence epistemology that they had. I don't know if that's all Mormons, but that's kind of these guys' perspective, and I kind of wasn't impressed by that. But I went to church with them, and it was good. They talked about the temple, and other than a couple of weird things because they have this weird thing about the temple, like telestial and celestial and whatever kingdoms, right? So what happens is that um, it is kind of fun, going to their church, all that kind of good fun stuff. Got into a couple of good conversations, not necessarily about the differences between Christianity and Mormonism, but within Christianity and whatnot. So there was this really beautiful point I think someone made about Aaron's staff and the Ark of the Covenant that bloomed. Okay, and here's what it was. Okay, it was that you have the staff and it's made out of dead wood, right? The wood is dead, and then what happens is that the miracle of it blooming is God's power bringing it to life again, right? And that was just a really beautiful picture of Jesus in the Ark of the Covenant and whatnot. So anyway, what happens is that each and what was kind of said was that each and this wasn't said, this was my thoughts while they were talking about these three items that are in it. So what you have is that you have this wooden staff which is dead and comes to life. That I think that's pretty clearly Jesus. You have these tablets that are written on stone, containing the covenant, and that's God the Father. And then you have the manna that people eat and actually kind of live on, and that's God the Spirit. Anyway, that is completely irrelevant to it. But anyway, what I do is that we talk, and what I promise is that I'm going to read 3 Nephi, right? And prayerfully ask God what He wants to say to me through it, all those kind of good fun stuff and that requires a certain mindset because, if Mormonism is the truth, I want to know the truth. Whatever the truth is, I want to know it. If atheism is the truth, I want to know that, right? If I don't know Buddhism or Shintoism or whatever religion or spiritual belief you have, if it is actually true, then I want to know it. And so what I did is that it took me a little bit to kind of get the time in the headspace that I needed, in the heart space that I needed, because a lot of the times I think I can be too critical. And a lot of the time I think that if you're not in the right headspace or the right heart space, you're not going to kind of give a book or a spiritual text or whatever its real due. You should be reading your Bible every day, but you don't read the Bible with the same level of intensity every day. Sometimes, and this is kind of hard to describe it, sometimes your heart is harder than other times. What happens is that you'll read something and it'll just you don't know what you read 5 minutes later. Other times you'll read something and it really just kind of sinks down uh, into you, you know. And sometimes that comes with prayer, that comes with having the time and the mental bandwidth and the, for lack of a better word, the spiritual bandwidth to deal with it, right? Right. So anyway, what happens is that it takes me a little bit of time to actually get it. So what I do kind of for my job is that I'm an author, and I love writing and all that kind of good fun stuff. And kind of what happens is that um, I'm approaching this text kind of in many ways as somebody who writes, somebody who reads, and somebody who kind of thinks through those sorts of things, right? In this prayerful accepting of kind of if it's true, it's true, but if it's not, I won't to do it. And kind of what I was getting is that the Spirit was disconfirming it. It was saying, no, there are true Christians who are Mormons, but Mormonism has embraced a false prophet, and they tolerate false prophets. And so there are Christians who are Mormons, but they aren't saved by their Mormonism. They're saved by all of the other good things, or through their love of Christ, not through all of these really crazy, wacky things that Mormons can kind of believe, right? And when I don't know if this is how every Mormon would present it, but when I was presented with kind of the plan of salvation, I was like, okay, you know what? I don't agree with Mormons on a lot, but this is submitting to Jesus, Anyway, so what happens is that what I'm about to say is not on this kind of faith side of things. This is on the intellectual side of things. Like I said, on the faith side of things, I was getting a disconfirmation, right? But here's the thing: is that if intellectually, what happens is that everything lines up, then you know what? Even though my spirit's going, this is wrong. I don't like this. I was still going to have to check it out further. Okay, and so here's what happens. Right, is that I'm kind of reading it in this prayerful, this receptive kind of state of mind, right? And I was just tossing out a lot of the issues I've heard about and coming to the text fresh and, while with a degree of skepticism, one that can read the book on its own merits and internal framing rather than kind of all the rumor and wild speculation and all that kind of stuff. So, what happens is that there's this thing called voice. Okay. And authorial voice is an author's unique, consistent writing style. Their fingerprint comprising their personality, sentence structure, word choice, word view, so on and so forth. Its distinct and often recognizable presence of the writer behind the words, separate from the characters or the narrator or the plot or what's actually going in them. In short, voice is how you can look at, say, a H.P. Lovecraft short story, and even without knowing who the author is, go, hey, this is a Lovecraft story, right? And it's this thing that is identifiable if you know kind of what to look for, and it's um, and it can have different qualities, right? H.P. Lovecraft found literally everything horrifying, you know? And you could take the simplest thing, like a fish, and he would just find the horrifying, disgusting, yeah, aspects about it, right? And so that's what voice is, okay? And so as I'm reading as I'm preparing to read it, like the when I use the term voice, this is what I'm talking about. This distinctly identifiable fingerprint that somebody puts onto everything that they write. Okay, so what happens is that the first thing we have to talk about is these kind of internal expectation. And what does this text say about itself, right? And so the first thing that I want to point out is that Mormon in 3 Nephi 5, 8 through 10 states that what we have is a abridgment of Nephi's original text. Okay, so we have the kind of the Nephi base layer of what he wrote. We have Mormon on top of that, and then we have Joseph Smith translating what Mormon abridged, basically. And so what happens is that we should observe the text to have a sense of brevity to it. Basically, it's going to come up later, but what one of the things that we know about the Gospels is that they worked under length constraints, right? So in John, you have the same sort of saying of if everything was said, I don't know if all the libraries could contain it all. And then you have Luke and Acts, which are both, which this is true for all of the Gospels and everything, but they're sized specifically to fit onto just one scroll. And that's because scrolls were very expensive. Okay. And so what happens is that we see that there's this kind of they don't spend a lot of time lingering on things. They don't have a lot of repetition, because they have to fit things onto this scroll, right? And so what happens is that they have this kind of sense of brevity, of compression in them. So second, now, while I don't expect this kind of simplistic single author uniformity, I kind of expect the voice shifts to be explainable by the internal frame. And one of the things that I'll say is that voice, because it emerges naturally, is something that's relatively easy to keep consistent, right? A consistent voice across all of these different aspects of writing is something that is relatively easy to keep consistent because it's not something that you generally think about as an author. Okay, it's something that emerges from your own personality, from your own point of view, so on and so forth. And then third, that this record was written sometime after Jesus ascends again to heaven, and that happened in perhaps 34 or 35 AD, according to the text, right? And so that what that means is that I expect independence from sources that Nephi and Mormon wouldn't have access to, right? So brevity, consistent voice, independence. These are features that are internal to the text, and I would expect, given what the Book of Mormon says, kind of just about itself. Okay, and so as I'm starting to read it, I'm just what strikes me about the text is that this author is not concerned with brevity. He likes to repeat things. He likes to say something and then say it a different way, right? There's this uh, people who are not necessary for the story are in there, and then they talks extensively about them and all these kind of things. So, for a concrete example, in 3 Nephi 2:24, we have he did send out his armies at the nighttime and did cut away their retreat and did place his army in the way of their retreat. And this is basically saying the same thing twice, right? And so what we learn is that Nephi, the book of Nephi, has a voice that is very repetitive, very expansive in how it deals with things, right? And so what this was is that this voice doesn't match the book of 3 Nephi being an abridgment, right? Of having a limitation in terms of the space that they have to write on, and they have to make all these trade-offs for what they include, right? And what this was is that this was a clue for me to kind of look a little bit deeper, kind of as I'm reading. And so what happens is that I'm like, okay, let's just kind of put this I think what I think is a rather serious objection to the side for a moment. And for whatever reason, let's just say that this is kind of the voice of the book of Nephi, right? And then what happens is that I'm just kind of looking for this kind of consistent voice, and what happens is that in the book of Nephi, there is this change of voice. Okay. And what happens is that it changes into a very tight, very abridged style where, like, basically they're kind of cranking out like 1 or 2 lines for dealing with something rather than an extremely long repetitive way of doing things. So 3 Nephi 3:16 is a concrete example of this. What we have is that we have a single short verse about praying in secret, why to do it, and then basically that topic is left behind. There's like here's what it is, here's why you do it. Okay, on to the next thing. And it's very outside the voice of the rest of 3 Nephi, this one particular section. So even when what happens is that, and I know it's not just because Jesus is speaking, because what happens is that after this section of like 3 chapters or so, we kind of see a return to Nephi's expansive, repetitive sort of voice. Okay. And so it's not because Jesus is saying these things that the voice changes. Okay. And so I'm like, okay, cool. What's different about this section? Why is it different? And kind of as I read it, what I found was that this section of brevity is textually dependent on Matthew. Okay. And this is really, really critical. This is a huge problem because Matthew is a summary and arrangement of Jesus's teachings that was originally written. Most scholars are going to say in the 70s AD. I tend to put it a little bit earlier, but I don't. I personally don't have a huge dog in the fight about when Matthew is dated. An early date for it is probably 50. Because Luke is early 60s, I tend to want to put Matthew a bit earlier than around 70. But that's just kind of my personal dating. Most of the time, what they'll say is that Matthew's written around 70. Okay. But even the most closest to Jesus's time frame that Matthew is written is in the 50s, right? And what happens is that in the Sermon on the Mount, which is the part that is textually that the 3 Nephi is textually dependent on. What happens is that we're seeing Jesus, and he's teaching for hours and hours. And what happens is that you can read the entire Sermon on the Mount in a lot less than an hour, right? And so what this tells us is we're reading this kind of summary and arrangement of Jesus' teachings rather than necessarily an actual verbatim talk that he gives, right? And so this creates this anachronism where Nephi or Mormon, they don't have the Matthean literary text in the New World, right? Because what happens is that even if Jesus gives the exact same talk, what's going to happen is that Nephi and Mormon are going to summarize and arrange those things differently. And that's what you would expect, right? So, and then another aspect is that a good speaker, and Jesus was certainly a good speaker. You read kind of read between the lines and you see that Jesus is this just incredibly charismatic individual who just had a way of teaching people, right? And even if we're kind of getting this highlights reel of Jesus's teaching, he's very intelligent. He is very perceptive in how he teaches and how he even tailors what he's saying and the points that he wants to make to the individuals that he's talking to, right? And this is not something that's particularly special to Jesus. It's just what it kind of any good speaker does, is that if they're given the chance, they are going to tailor their speech to the audience that we're talking to, right? And what happens is that we even see this, an example of this in the text of Nephi, where Jesus uses the local currency rather than the Roman currency of first century Israel, right? And this gives us an expectation that, yeah, Jesus is adapting his phraseology and everything to the people that he's actually talking to, right? But and it's this kind of American context that he's speaking into rather than this kind of Jewish Aramaic context, right? And then what happens is that we see places where the Jewish Aramaic context remains, and it doesn't make sense for it to remain. So one of the things you have to remember is that there's kind of this point of departure about 600 AD, according to kind of the story and everything. And so anything that kind of develops after 600 AD is going to be kind of unique to the Jewish Aramaic context. And then you have unique quirks that are unique to the American context, right? And they're going to grow in just different directions, right? And what happens is that in 3 Nephi 12:22, Jesus tells them not to insult each other. And the word that he uses is the Aramaic raka rather than a Hebrew or Reformed Egyptian, right? And in that same verse, he mentions a council, the Sanhedrin, that they don't even have, okay? And if 3 Nephi is independent, while we would expect to see some overlap in the content, we don't expect Jesus to be importing cultural cues that is from the Jewish Aramaic context, right? And what happens is that it wouldn't get expressed the same way, right? Like how Jesus speaks in the rest of the, I would expect something more like how Jesus speaks in the rest of the book, where we can kind of recognize phrases that he uses, like the ones in the Bible, but not 100% exactly. And then it kind of has this own unique way of arranging things. And it's in Nephi's style, where he's very over explanatory and very verbose, and that kind of thing, right? Uh, and one of the things that we have to realize here is that it's not just kind of the direct content from Matthew that's getting copied, right? It's also this how it's organized and arranging, right? So what happens is that if I take notes of a professor and my best friend takes notes, what will happen is that after class or whatever, we're going to compare notes and find that we didn't take identical notes, right? And because everybody has their own way of kind of summarizing things, and like, and when you're kind of putting all of these things back together, or what happens is you have your own way of arranging things, right? And so what happens is that what we see is that this section is not just dependent on Matthew for the content, it's also how it's organized that's dependent, right? And then there was this other issue that I've kind of hinted at a little bit. We should expect translational issues, right? Because what Joseph Smith is doing is that he's doing a translation. Okay, and I don't remember precisely, but from what I understand, Joseph is taking a look at the seer stone, this Urim and Thummim or whatever, and basically there's an image of the word that needs to be translated or the phrase or whatever, and then an image of what the character is, and that's how he translates the Book of Mormon, right? And so what we have is a translation from the Reformed Egyptian to English. Okay. And so, and when we think about it, it basically what happens is that this leaves us kind of this translational shift, because so you have Jesus originally teaching in Aramaic, then it being translated to Greek, and then finally into English, right? Whereas in 3 Nephi, what we have is that it's preached in Hebrew or Reformed Egyptian, and then either translated to Reformed Egyptian, or if it was originally spoken in Reformed Egyptian, translated to English. Okay, and what happens is that even like with modern translation, right? Like there are different translations of Matthew, right? And that's of just using the same Greek text to English, right? And there are definite differences there. And so, but what we find is that the the wording is extremely dependent on what Matthew said, occasionally with little additions or clarifications or difference in emphasis, but still absolutely textually dependent on Matthew, right? And there's no reason to expect that like these different transmission paths would wording, even if like even if he's saying the exact same things, right? And then so one thing that some people might say is that Joseph like he has a revelatory translation that could use the familiar KJV wording when rendering material that was already substantially parallel to kind of what the Bible is teaching. So, you can kind of imagine him going, oh, I kind of recognize is this bit. Let's just kind of take the KJV word. However, given all the considerations above, we have no reason to think that the material Joseph would have to work with would be substantially parallel. Okay, you have a different culture, you have a different translation path, you have different summarization and different arrangement, right? All of these things have to be identical, okay, for them to be substantially parallel. And I don't think that is a reasonable assumption given what we know in taking this kind of seriously. So some might say that 3 Nephi is basically a mindful copy of Matthew with different aspects and whatnot emphasized. And what happens is that this objection misses the point. The problem is that 3 Nephi is copying it all, not how the text interacts with what it's copying, right? So because Matthew is written in, say, the 50s, this is still 20 years after Jesus has left. Okay. And so it's not really possible for Matthew to have gotten to Nephi for him to copy, or to Mormon for him to copy. Okay. You could probably go on this, but the evidence is clear to me that 3rd Nephi is textually dependent on Matthew in multiple ways that it shouldn't be, given these kind of internal signals that the Book of Mormon gives us. The issue is not Jesus couldn't teach the same thing twice. He absolutely could. The issue is that at 2 independent records of Jesus' teachings would not normally converge on the same kind of extended sequence, wording, literary arrangement, and through different translation paths and languages, audiences, scribes, all of these things, right? The best textual explanation is dependence on Matthew. But Matthew, as this kind of old world gospel text, isn't available within the Book of Mormon's claimed ancient New World setting. Okay, so it's not brief, it's not consistent, it's not independent. Okay, the text lack of brevity clued me in to its rather expansive voice. When that voice became inconsistently brief, it clued me into the difference in a section of the text. That difference made me realize that it's dependent on Matthew. My concern is not merely that 3 Nephi sounds wrong to me. The voice issue is what alerted me to the problem. The real issue is that there is a textual dependence anachronism in the Book of Mormon that it absolutely should not have according to its own text. Okay. And because the Book of Mormon keeps violating its own kind of internal structure. Okay, this is an internal critique. This is not going, well, Joseph copied from the KJV, right? This is a much more internal critique of what the text itself is saying. Okay, this isn't, Joseph is bad. That how the Book of Mormon was translated was wrong. Right? I'm bracketing all of those questions and just looking at the text as it's presented to me. And as it's presented to me, there are a lot of problems with it that betray it is not what it is presenting itself to be. So, anyway, I'm sorry that was kind of long and rambly and all that kind of good fun stuff, but I just had to put this ad hoc video out there to kind of explain why it is that I am that I'm just not I'm not impressed by what I've read in the Book of Mormon. Now, could a Mormon apologist is like help me out here, give me a deeper understanding, and maybe I'll change my mind? Maybe, but you're going to have to do just a lot of work when it comes to that. So, hey, I want to thank you for watching my channel. I do very rare ad hoc videos. So, I'm going to, if you subscribe, I don't know if I'm ever going to do another video again, if I'm completely honest. But this was something that I felt I needed to say, and I really don't feel like I could say anywhere else. So have a great day, and just let me close in prayer real quick. Lord, I want to thank you because you are the light of truth that comes into our lives and that we want to see, Lord. Lord, whatever else is happening, reveal the truth to us and then help us to act on the truths that you reveal, Lord. Your word is truth. And I just want to thank you and praise you for your word that has guided me and helped me live my life here. And I want to bless everyone who's under the sound of my voice, that you will prosper, that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, Lord. And it will give you freedom from sin, freedom from the world, freedom to not just be alive, but to have an abundant, overflowing life like you've promised us to give. Not just life, but life more abundant, Lord. Keep us from the one who wants to steal, to kill, and destroy, so that we can live for you here, Lord. So I want to thank you for everyone who's listening. Guide them into all truth. Amen.